Hello and welcome to Vodcast 13.6. In our final Vodcast for Chapter 13, I will overview the instruments we use to measure wind and the factors that affect changing wind speed and changing wind direction. When it comes to measuring wind, there are two basic instruments that we can use. In order to measure wind direction, we use what's called a wind vane. Wind vanes can involve compass points, or they can use a 0 to 360 degree scale. In the image you see on the screen, the wind vane is to the top right side. I know I've hinted at this in previous videos, but winds will be labeled from where they originate. So a northern wind will blow from the north, a southern wind will blow from the south, and so on. Another very important concept regarding wind direction is prevailing winds. A prevailing wind will come more often from one direction than another direction. For instance, here in the Midwest, we have prevailing winds that tend to come from the westerly direction because of the westerlies. Now that doesn't mean the wind always comes from the west. Sometimes it can come from the south, it can come from the north, it can come from the northwest, the southwest, the east, whatever, you get the point. But put simply, prevailing winds will be the winds that come from one direction more frequently than other directions. Shown on the screen is a nice little representation of prevailing winds. The longest of the lines shown in this image indicates the direction in which the prevailing wind is coming from. And this image makes sense because in the continental United States, we would expect to see prevailing winds coming from the general westerly direction. So wind vanes are used to measure wind direction, but cup anemometers are used to measure wind speed. Cup anemometers function kind of like old school car speedometers. And those cups that you see in the image will catch wind and start to spin, and the rate at which they spin will help us get a quantitative measurement of the wind speed. Our final consideration in Chapter 13 is changes in wind direction. I just overviewed prevailing winds, and prevailing winds tend to come from one direction more often than another direction. But on a day-to-day basis, winds can come from any direction. Now the question is, what causes changes in wind direction? Well, put as simply as possible, changes in wind direction are going to be associated with the locations of cyclones and anticyclones. Because wind is really just the flow of air from high pressure regions to low pressure regions. So if we look at a weather map and see the position of the H's and the L's, their positions relative to one another will have a huge impact on the wind direction and the wind speeds in a given area. Now it's also important to note that changes in wind direction can also bring about changes in temperature and changes in moisture conditions. As an example, winds coming out of the north tend to be cooler, whereas southern winds can bring warm, moist air to a region. I like to focus in on the weather map you see on the right side of this slide, but we are going to come back and reference what you see on the left just to explain where the winds are coming from and what's occurring around the highs and the lows. If we live in southern Illinois, which I'm going to indicate here on the screen, we are positioned to the right side of the red L you see in southern Missouri. Now keep in mind that the winds work counterclockwise around cyclones, and the winds will converge towards the center of the cyclone. So in southern Illinois, we would expect to see a southerly wind. Now very obviously, as shown on the map, we are also getting hit by precipitation, because we often find cloud formation and precipitation occurring near low pressure centers. But now let's pretend you live in north central Missouri, which is indicated right here. With the winds moving around the low pressure center in a counterclockwise fashion, you should expect to see winds coming out of the northerly direction. Because if you take a look at the isobars and the pressure gradient in this region, the winds will want to move towards that low pressure center, and because they're working counterclockwise around that low, they will be coming from the northern direction. Now over time, these lows and highs can move around. They don't just stay where they're at. So you might see the low indicated here move to the east over the coming days, and the high located here may be moved to the south over the coming days. And as the lows and highs move around the continent, they will change the wind direction, the wind speed, and the weather conditions for all of the areas indicated on the map. So the key point here is that the relative positions of highs and lows will impact the weather on a continuous basis. Okay, that concludes this video podcast, and that concludes Chapter 13. In Chapter 14, we'll shift our attention to weather patterns and severe weather.